Welcome to Permission to Thrive. I'm your host, Suzi Lula. As a spiritual therapist for over 20 years, I have the honor and privilege of ushering women and mothers just like you on a journey from simply surviving to powerfully thriving. I also have the honor of raising our son, Will, who is now a young adult, with my longtime partner, Jamie, so I'm right there on the journey with you. Consider this your personal sanctuary, your space to meet your heart, embrace your messy, and come home to your most authentic, extraordinary self. My hope is that you leave resourced and inspired because you are here to shine. Welcome to Permission to Thrive. Hello, and welcome everyone. If you are new to our community, welcome. I'm so happy to have you. I have big news, a big announcement for you all. Throughout the year, I teach different online courses, all assisting you to create a truly thriving life, to create the life that you came here to live, to create the life of your dreams. And this September 25th and 26th, I'll be teaching a free 2-day masterclass called Healing the Heart of the Inner Child. So unhealed trauma, unprocessed wounding from our childhood, it gets stuck and lodged in our bodies, in our emotions. And that unhealed material keeps us from truly thriving in your life. To the degree that you have unhealed, unprocessed energy material within you is to the degree that you are holding yourself back from living a truly thriving life. And so over this 2-day period, I'm going to guide you to heal that which is keeping you stuck and free you to step into the thriving life that you are here to live. So join me September 25th and 26th. It's free. The link with all the information is in the show notes. And now sit back, relax, and receive the best of today's episode of Permission to Thrive. Much love, everyone, and welcome everyone to this week's episode of Permission to Thrive. I'm really so excited about this week's episode. We are talking all things inner child, healing the heart of the inner child, what the heck the inner child is, why it could literally change your life, transform your life as it has mine, as the relationship to your inner child has changed yours, Joe. So I have Joe Argazzi that all of you are getting to know, soul psychology coach with me. We're both coaches. Joe has many other certifications in his own right. You are a grief counselor as well. So many different modalities you work with, and we work together. And I know you to be a big advocate of understanding and creating a deep relationship with the inner child. I know that relationship has transformed your life. So I'm not only excited to jump into this topic with you, but for all of you listening, I'm so excited because learning about the inner child can be so abstract, intimidating, full of mythology, very intellectual. There are few individuals that really understand how life-changing your relationship with that precious child within you can be, and all of us have an inner child. And so if you are interested in transforming your life in a quantum way, like you're ready to quantum leap the transformation in your life, this is the episode for you. So welcome, Joe, back. I'm so happy to have you and be in this conversation with you.
Thanks, Suze. Yeah, same here. And to all the listeners, man, I'm telling you, you're in for a ride. You're in for a real treat. And one of the things I caught, Susie, while you were speaking was that we call it the inner child, but really at its essence is our soul.
Yes.
and had all the layers of the influence of family and society and culture forced upon it, unconsciously for the most part. But when we start to remove those layers of external influences and create space for that inner child, if you will, the truest essence of who we are, that's what we experience. And so the work that I've done with you, especially with the inner child, through soul care, through your soul care coaching, and being able to dive deep into that has, and boy, this is going to sound hokey, but I'm going to say it, it has liberated me. It has given me a freedom unlike, and look at, I've been in the field for decades and I love all the books I've read and they've all been helpful, but most of it has been intellectual. And here's the thing for most of us, if we've experienced trauma when we're young, that happens on the emotional level and it happens to that little child. So the antidote to that is then to meet that little child in with emotion as well,
Mm,
where they feel seen and heard and ultimately begin to feel safe. And when that little one feels safe, guess
mm,
what? The truest essence of who they are, he or she or they, has room now to actually begin to emerge.
mm,
And it's liberating in the truest sense.
mm.
Yeah. So
So
I'm
is
happy
what
about
I'm
that.
hearing you say, I love this because what a great place to start. What is the inner child
Mm,
exactly? How is it formed? And then how can being in a relationship with it liberate your life as it has liberated yours, Joe?
mm, mhm,
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the essence of the inner child, so every one of us walking on planet Earth has been a child and we have gone through experiences in our childhood. And so what you're saying is that the essence of the inner child is your soul, that each one of us has a pure, pristine, transcendent energy, a higher self, an energy of our spirit, an energy that is greater and larger than our human self. And the essence of our child self, the essence when you were born, the essence of you is this pristine, expansive, infinite, loving presence. And then what I think I heard you say was that as we move through our childhood, different conditionings and traumas get thrust upon us, is the way I think I heard you say it,
yeah, 100%.
unintentionally by those around us. So here you have this soul. And what I want everybody to hear is that the inner child, there's so much mythology around the inner child, so many
Mhm.
misunderstandings. The inner child within you is your soul, your essence, your authenticity, your most awed self, that childlike wonder, that childlike awe that really has not been indoctrinated or cultured or have trauma thrust upon. That is the essence of this place inside of you that is still infinite and untouched. And then, yes, also, both and, you have gone through real childhood experiences. We have all been conditioned, indoctrinated into family conditioning, generational family conditioning, different mental health issues, trauma. And so, what you're saying is that there is an essence, there is a gem, there is a diamond, and on top of that gem and diamond and sparkly light have been these childhood experiences. And what we're here today to assist you all with is how to uncover that light, that essence of who you truly are. Am I saying it back? I know I elaborated.
Oh, no, that's perfect because, and the only thing I'll add to that is also the influences of culture and society. And they're not malicious. This is how we grow up. So we take verbatim what we're being influenced by, and we take that on as an identity, which may or may not be true to our authentic essence. And that's what's so cool because we hear a lot about, oh, be your most authentic self. Well, let's ask the question, what is that? You
Mm,
know, beyond the influence of, again, family or religion or culture or society. And sometimes trauma plays a big part in that too, and sometimes not. But it
Mm,
is about being more open, being a really good student of ourselves to
mm,
see what the greater truth of who we are in terms of our purest essence and our unique expression, as it said, is, and then allow that to blossom.
mm.
That's where the real freedom lies, is by, for me anyway, in experiencing the work I've done with you. Let's use the word trigger. So, oh, I got triggered. Well, what is a trigger actually? It's a reaction to some kind of external circumstance. So if I get triggered, my knee-jerk response before I began to do this work with you was to try and control the situation, control the person, control the circumstance, because I was in some kind of pain if
Mhm.
I'm triggered. It
Yes,
doesn't feel good. So I want out of the pain. So if I can't control you and I can't control the circumstance, I'm going to look for something else to soothe myself. And that
yes,
would be some form of addiction. You see how multi-layered this starts to get? But I'm still on the surface. I haven't really gotten down to what's really going on in terms of the trigger and the core issue underneath that. And that's where the inner child, we want to call it that, or the survival self, that's the origin of where the trigger comes from.
yes,
Is that
exactly.
correct? Are you? Yeah.
So if I like to keep things really simple, so in my work over the decades of
Mm,
working with individuals, what I have found is that we have two parts to ourselves. So where you started, so important. Who is your authentic self? Are you in touch with your essence that is underneath the conditioning? So, underneath the conditioning that you have
mm,
had,
mhm.
there's an essence of you. And I call that our soul self. You were referring the inner child, you can call the inner child your soul self, your shiny self, your
Right.
sparkly self, your most authentic self within each one of us. When you really sit still and ask yourself, who am I authentically? There's a space, a place, an energy that you will connect to, and you will know who you really are. And then there is what I call the survival self. So
Mhm.
we have the soul self, which is the essence. And then we have the survival self, which is what you're speaking of. It's all the indoctrinations, trauma, and all the layerings that have happened. And that leads to addiction, managing, controlling those outer behaviors that are trying to keep you safe. So
Correct.
we are indoctrinated. I call that the survival self, the job. Other people call it the ego. I don't like to use the word ego because most of us have been indoctrinated to have somewhat of a negative connotation with the word ego. We've got to get rid of it, it gets in our way. The survival self is the child part of you that literally learned to survive in your family of origin, given your circumstances, in your school culture, in your cultural upbringing, in whatever ways and experiences that you went through, your child self learned to survive. So if we keep it really simple, we have the soul self that is the essence, it's the shiny diamond, the authenticity, your essence. And then there are all the different things that we went through as a child. And as a child, you learn to survive in your family, in your school playground, in your classroom. If
In
you
your
were
church or
in
religion.
your
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
Yes, in different institutions, in different life experiences, with an uncle that
Right.
touched you inappropriately, whatever it is, you did go through experiences. And so, this child part of you, because it wasn't fully developed, and most often it didn't have someone to help you process what was happening, needed to survive, and it learned to survive. So I call it the survival self. And the reason I call it the survival self rather than the egoic shell, which it actually is an egoic shell, but I like to call it the survival self. Why? Because if you're listening and you begin to look back at the things that you went through as a child, you are more likely and more able to express compassion for yourself.
Exactly.
When you look back and you were 4, you were 6, you were 8, someone touched you inappropriately, you were bullied on a playground, like you said, things happened in a church. Whatever happened, you learned to survive. And so when you think of yourself as, oh my gosh, I was just 6 learning to survive in a family where my mother and father were yelling all the time, or I was just 8 trying to learn to survive as the 8th of 8 children, whatever it is that you can look back, what you want to evoke inside of you is a tremendous sense of compassion. Oh, it's so understandable that I would then want to manage and control my life because, oh, I was touched inappropriately for all those years and I kept it secret because there was nobody to help me through. So you want to begin to have compassion for the part of you, the survival self, that learned how to survive within your situations.
And you know, Susie, to that point, it's like, because the thing that we're looking for, I think from day one, is connection,
Mhm.
right? And we learn that from other human beings. And if we feel safe, we have a connection to ourself
Mm,
that's more holistic. If we
mm,
don't have that connection from another human being and we start developing these survival strategies, the survival self takes over,
mm,
there's a disconnect that occurs. And so we're constantly looking for some form of validation or connection outside ourselves.
mhm,
The reason that this inner child work for me was so effective is because the first step, and it's such the most simplest phrase, and for all of you listening, please hear this, is that we say to that part of ourselves when triggered, it's like, it's so understandable. And the reason we say that, because that in compassion, there's no judgment. You know, if they're acting out in some way because that's how they survived, well, good for me. Good for that part of myself that figured out some way to make it through.
mm.
You know, how beautiful is that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you could give any kind of a specific example, or I will think of one to put it in context so anyone listening can begin to hear how to apply this in the most simplistic of ways, because what you said is so important. Every one of us is seeking in our life, both as a child and currently, to
Yes,
feel seen, to
that's
know
right.
that our life is important, to know that our life matters, to have someone or something reflect back to us, mirror back to us that we are whole, that we are not broken, that there's nothing wrong with us. And so often we, out of this need to survive and learning to survive, we do create these protective layers. And that's important because we're learning to survive.
Absolutely.
Deep down, deep within, we're protecting the essence of us. We're protecting the light. We're protecting the vulnerability so that it can remain untouched. So, for instance, if someone was sexually molested, as horrific as that is,
Yeah.
and unthinkable, really, and then your survival self, your childlike self, learned how to survive in that by keeping a secret and not telling anyone. And now, cut to, you're an adult and you're very controlling and managing your outer situations, and you have a very tentative, if best, relationship with safety. And so you're guarded and you're defended and you're defensive. If you have that, when the way I work with the inner child, reflecting back what you're saying, Joe, when I can look back at myself and say, it's so understandable that I would be defensive currently in my adult life. It's so understandable that I would have 17 protective layers and I'm pushing people away, even though I really want to bring them close to me. It's very understandable. I'm not condoning those behaviors. I'm not condoning. I'm not judging. I'm simply saying, in the context of the fullness of my life, having gone through what I went through, it's very understandable that I would be protective. And so maybe you can give us an example of, and so then what do we do? How do we work with that part? Because ultimately, The brilliance of inner child work is to merge the survival self
100%.
back to the soul self, is to heal the inner child, is to heal the survival self. Healing comes from connection. Love is the medicine. And so we're needing then to create that inner connection because we ultimately want to merge back so that we're living from a certain flow and energetic flow of our soul that just embraces the hurt part. So if you can make that more practical, because
Yeah,
people
yeah.
listening may be going, what the heck is she talking
So beautiful, so
about?
beautifully said, right? Because ultimately it is about the integration of that inner child with the grown man, because that part of me now feels seen and heard and feels safe. And that's on me to do that work. So here's an example, but I want to say, quick sidebar. I used to feel crazy before I understood the concept of inner child, because as a grown man who's done a lot of reading and a lot of work and therapy, etc., I understood the dynamics. So then why would a trigger happen and I would all of a sudden become irate on a scale of 1 to 10, where the reaction would be a healthy, normal reaction would be a 3. I'm at a 7. I'm at an 8. And quite frankly, I felt way out of balance. I felt crazy. It's like, what's wrong with me? Because my reaction was so volatile and it just didn't make sense. Once I learned about, if I look at it, and listeners, this is so important, when I began to look at it, it's not the adult's reaction. This is a 5-year-old's reaction. And guess what? They're going to react at a 7 because they don't have the cognitive reasoning and understanding of what's really going on. That's where that was coming from. And when I was able to distinguish the difference, it created a huge shift for me, a great big breakthrough
Because
where I
what
was in.
happens,
Yeah, go ahead.
because what happens when I have a volatile reaction, the first thing I typically do is judge myself then for having the volatile reaction, or my partner will judge me, or
Yeah,
society will judge me because we judge volatile behavior. So here I am, I'm having a volatile reaction. It's a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10. And the judgment comes. We all judge behavior. We judge a
yeah,
6-year-old. And then you said it
yeah,
goes back to a 6-year-old, but we judge the 6-year-old for having a tantrum because society, culture hasn't learned how to have a loving relationship with emotions and behaviors. So what you're
that's right.
saying is so profound, is that when you look at yourself in current life and you say, oh my gosh, I just reacted out of such volatility. I'm yelling, I'm raging, I feel angry, and it's all spewing out like a volcano at my spouse, at my 5-year-old, at my friend, at myself. But you are able then to go back and see an innocent child. Oh, I see. Well, of course I'm this is the key part. You have to hear that we're not condoning behavior. I'm not condoning to get volatile. I'm
Right.
saying to have a visceral, somatic, in your nervous system understanding. Oh, there's a 5-year-old little girl or little boy within me that never had anybody help me process what happened to me. And
Exactly.
so maybe I was the recipient of being in a home where people yelled. Maybe I was the recipient of bullying. Maybe I was sexually abused, whatever it is. Now, cut to, oh, I'm not condoning it. I'm having a really deep, connected understanding of the connection, and it's still here so that we can heal it. And that is why the
Yeah.
healing of the inner child is so profound. So, do you have a particular example that goes with that, or are you
Yeah, I
saying
have
that was
about
a pattern of
68 years
yours?
of examples that go with this, but I'll give you one for now. The first step is the awareness of these two dynamics at play. Once I became aware of it, it gave me the opportunity then to witness when I would get triggered. And as soon as I get triggered, here's a phrase for those of you listening. It comes from a 12-step program, but if it's hysterical, it's historical. That really helped me understand if my reaction is really strong, it's probably historically based, which means there's a little Joe in there that's scared, that's confused, that's hurt, that's afraid. And so my ability to then, so here's what happens. So we understand the dynamics at play. So I'm out with my partner and we're in a lovely setting outside and we're listening to this guitar player. It's a public setting. And there was a little girl, I'm going to say she's maybe 5 or 6, who was a couple of feet away from me. And the guitarist was playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow, interestingly enough. And she and I had locked eyes and I'm like singing with her, like quietly, but it's verbal. I'm singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow and she and I are smiling. And my partner turns to me and he says, "Be quiet."
Mm.
And I instantly shut down. Instantly. It's like I'm having this lovely connection. And because I felt that young part of me, looking back on it, felt criticized, that I had done something wrong. And that little young Joe not only feels like he'd done something wrong because of what happened when he was young, he felt he was wrong. And then I got really angry because I was having this lovely time. I shut down. I couldn't address it at the moment, but I was aware of this work. And I thought, as soon as I get home, I'm going to process this. Right. So I wasn't in denial of the anger. I wasn't in denial of being triggered, but I knew it was for me. There was something in this for me to sit with and spend time with. We ended up walking home. He walked into the bedroom and shut the door. The little boy inside of me felt instantly abandoned because he felt he did something wrong. And this is all paternal stuff for me. So what was being acted out was dad left. I wanted dad's approval. I clearly, from a little child's perspective, I'd done something wrong. It was so strong within me. I sat the little guy down on the couch. We sat down together and I was saying, "It's so understandable you're having all these feelings right now.
Mm.
Tell me more." He said, "No, we got to go to the bedroom." I'm not kidding. His need was so strong that he literally picked me up, walked me to the bedroom door, put my hand on the doorknob to turn it to go in because he wanted to make sure he was going to be okay in terms of that relationship. I was able to go back to the couch and sit down by saying, "We can go do that if you need. I promise you, we can go talk to him later. But right now, why don't you and I sit down?
Mm.
Tell me more." Or you're feeling bad. You're feeling like you've done something wrong. Oh, you're really angry because you're having a lovely time and all of a sudden you felt criticized. How long have you felt that way? Tell me more about that. And as I began to meet him emotionally, not just like, "Oh, well, tell me more about that." It was like, "Oh, honey, tell me more. I'm so sorry. I can tell you're really upset. I'm right here with you." And as he began to feel the truth energetically of that, I could feel my nervous system began to calm down and began to center and began to align. And we just sat there. Now, this process took maybe 10 minutes. So we're not, so those of you listening, it's not a lot of time, but it is the quality of the time
Yes.
spent that's
Yes.
really important. And it can't be intellectual. That doesn't work. He has to be seen and heard emotionally,
Yeah.
validated. That's why, oh, honey, it's so understandable.
Yeah. So
And
these are the things I want to point out here
yeah,
that are so beautiful. Thank you for sharing such a real example that I can so relate to. I'm sure everyone listening can relate to. So I'm going to go through your example
mm,
and break it down, both in what was occurring and also the way that you were with yourself.
yeah,
And I'm going to start with the way that you were with yourself, because that's the most important part of really effectively learning how to heal the places inside of you that are still hurting as an adult. So, as a society, we are very mental, we're very academic, we're
mm,
very informational, and we teach how to heal from the mind. And the mind
hmm,
is very important. Love the mind. Can't do without the mind. But we leave out the heart. And the
right.
heart is where the love resides. And love heals. So, exactly what you're saying. So, as everyone listening, as you heard Joe's experience, The first thing you said, Joe, was you referenced your inner child as there's a little Joe within me. And then you said there was a little guy within me, or there is a little guy within me.
Mhm.
And so I want everyone to hear this languaging. So we
Mm.
hear the inner child, it's printed in books, it's written in books. When you say something like, oh, there's a little guy within me. There's a little girl within me. There's a little one within me. There's an innocent one within me.
Mhm.
There's a little one. There's a young one within me who was hurt. There's a young one within me who was bullied. There's an innocent one. When you begin to look back at yourself or look inward into yourself from the heart, and every one of us, whether you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, every one of us has a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old that went through your life. There's a young version of you. And when you begin to relate to yourself from the heart, it feels like and it sounds like something like Joe is saying, oh, there's a little guy within me. And so begin to refer to yourself, because what we want to do is we want to make the child part of you as real as possible. We don't want the child part of you to be something that is now intellectual. The child part of you lived a life. And so we want to relate to the child part of you as if it's a real 6-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old that is literally sitting on your lap. So then Joe is saying, there he was. He's in this beautiful, joyful moment. He caught the eye of an actual little girl. He's singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. They're having a moment. And in a moment, when his partner says, be quiet, what happens? That little boy within him, not the adult, the little boy within him shuts down. So in your own world, if you shut down, if you become controlling, if you try to manage, if you're defensive, whatever is your go-to protective state, when you begin to look at that protective state like Joe did, and it's not always easy in the moment. That's why you chose to go to say to yourself, I really want to look at this when I get home. I had an experience the other day where I heard myself speaking to Will about something, and I didn't like the way that I was talking about the situation. I didn't like the energy I was bringing into the conversation. And I made the same mental note. Later on, I'm really going to go sit with what's going on inside of me that I would be bringing negativity about another person into this conversation. So when we feel ourselves and hear ourselves either being explosive, volatile, or you even just sense, oh, I'm shutting down, then later you want to relate to that part of you, because if you are being reactive in the present moment, it means there is something unhealed from your past. And if you look at it like a younger part of yourself, it means that they need something from you. There is a need that isn't being met, and they're trying to get your attention the best way they know how. Developmentally, there's still a 6-year-old within you. And you want to have compassion for that. Developmentally, that 6-year-old just didn't learn and process how to become emotionally neutral. So you want to go back as if, and so when you were sharing how you were with yourself, it was very loving. It wasn't necessarily the words you were saying, but the tonality was like, oh, tell me all about it. It felt like listening to you. It felt like you literally had a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old on your lap, and you were giving that place a hug, and you were saying, tell me all about it. I want to know. It sounds like you were really hurting. And so this is the tonality. This is the feeling. This is healing. That is what compassion sounds like. That is what compassion feels like. Tell me more about it. I'm really interested. I really want to know what was going on with you back in that moment.
Oh, you're really, really angry? Tell me more. For those of you listening again, it's like all anger is, and I learned this from Susie, is a big hurt. It's not bad. It's just trying to get my attention and give me a message. It means, oh, you're really hurting somewhere. Where is that? So I
E-
just interject.
Exactly, exactly. So we're going to it. You can look at it somatically. Where in your body are you feeling that? Where in your nervous system are you feeling that? If it's anxiety, we put labels on these things: anxiety, exhaustion, anger, rage. This is just energy stored in our body. And I like to think of it as the younger part of me rather than, quote, anxiety, overwhelm, volatility, anger, because it humanizes it. It's not a
Definitely.
label. Anxiety is fine, it's important, but it isn't human. It's a label. And if there's a part of me that's feeling anxious, that is a younger part of me that needs mothering, that needs connection, that needs to feel heard and seen, as you're saying. And so, if you go back to your example, you were very kind, you were very compassionate, you were very sincerely interested, you were connected. And then what will happen is that will create safety. And the
Yeah.
more safety that you create inside, the more information you will get. And if that's all you do, for all of you listening, that's enough. Because as soon as you go to yourself and say, what was going on when you were so angry? I want to hear about it. Immediately, your nervous system is going to relax. You're
Yeah.
going to come into an inner coherence. That energy is going to pass. It took you a moment. You actually went to the door. I find that just utterly just fascinating. It shows how much you've practiced to be
Mm.
able to not go knock on that door and walk into that
Oh,
room.
yeah.
It,
To be aware that he was so scared of being abandoned.
yeah,
And by the way, speaking of the word abandonment, that's what this work is. It's learning how not to abandon ourselves,
yeah,
that part of ourselves, because that's his big fear. That's their big fear of being alone,
yeah.
right? And not feeling safe. So to be able to say, it's okay, we can come do this, to let him know you're not doing anything wrong. I see you and I see that desire to want to open that door. And of course, and we can come back and do that. Why don't we, for right now, go and sit on the couch and let me just be with you?
Yes, because
Yeah,
you're re-educating that part and showing that part, I'm right here with you.
exactly.
I will never leave you. Another
Yeah.
person may or may not be able to be there for you. We're all human. So at some moments, the other person is not going to be able to be there for us, nor is it their job. But when you teach yourself, I am here for you, I am not going anywhere, I'm sincerely interested. And so what happens is that's a mending, that's an inner repair, that's an inner bringing yourself back into your own homeostasis, your own wholeness. You are connecting with you. So these two splintered parts of you now merge into one because you are wrapping yourself around your own hurts. You are there for your own hurts. And what happens? You come into a unification
Yes.
inside of yourself. The energy dissipates. Now, it makes perfect sense given the context of your life and what you just shared. Your father, you said paternal. So you had probably, as a young child, been shushed often, been told, be quiet often. You had to be submissive to
Correct.
your father. So
Yeah.
you learned that you had to be submissive. So both when your partner then said, be quiet, it activated the part of you that for so many years had been told and controlled and managed what to do, when to do it, be a good little boy, be a good little soldier. It both activated that, and it probably enraged that part that never got to say anything back to your dad, like, shut the F up.
Exactly.
Don't
Ex
tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me.
So
And
what
you
happened to
didn't.
all those feelings? They get shoved down, which have
Yes,
been there for 60 years. They didn't
yes,
go away, right?
yes,
So little by little, by the way, you do this once, it's good, but there will be more opportunities,
yes. And
right?
so every time you say to that younger part of yourself, I'm not condoning your behavior, I'm not judging your behavior. What I'm seeing is that it's so understandable that because you were controlled and managed and submissive to a very militaristic indoctrination as a young little boy, of course you wanted to just tell him. Of course you wanted to go walk back in that room. And of course you didn't want to be abandoned. It it's so understandable. I see. It makes sense. I'm right here with you. I've got you. You can lean into me. And the way that Joe is describing what he said, how he said it, that is your takeaway today. If you receive nothing else, you want to begin to lean into what does feeling compassion for the younger part of myself feel like, sound like, because the ultimate is you want to rescue that little boy. You want to rescue that little girl within you. So ultimately, what Joe is doing by sitting that part of himself on his lap, he's rescuing a part of himself that developmentally is stuck as a
Yes.
6-year-old with a very dominant father. So there's a part of each one of us that gets stuck in the trauma. And that's the reactive part. It's trying to get our attention. And so he was able to, in essence, rescue that little boy, bring that little boy part of him from that old behavior of being in that relationship with his father and take him out of that energy and bring him into a current loving energy. So he's literally rescuing a part of himself that is stuck in an old energy and updating that part, bringing that part, rescuing that part, bringing that part into a current, loving, different, it's not a hostile environment anymore. It's a loving environment. He changed the environment. He changed the atmosphere. He brought this younger part of himself into a consciousness, into his heart that he's been practicing. He's been cultivating. What does it feel like to be compassionate with myself? And I just can't say this loud enough or enough times. It's so healing. You do this enough times, you practice this, and I promise you, like I'm sitting here, you will grow into a different being, a more unified being, in a flow state, more connected to your soul, your essence. Why? Because right now, everyone listening, me, Joe, you all, cells of your body are being birthed right now. We are always having cells die away. We're always having cells being born. What you want is you want your current cells in your body to be being born into an environment of compassion. Because when these cells are born into a compassionate consciousness, you're born into wholeness. And you recognize, oh, I'm not who I was. I've been whole all the time. And so this is the power of the inner child work. It's rescuing that inner child, providing that inner child with compassion. Compassion heals. Love is medicine. Compassion is medicine. Love heals. And the loving presence will have you in your next moment be born into wholeness, into your authenticity. It will help you merge,
That's
literally
exactly right.
merge.
And you are literally creating new neural pathways. And so it will start to take over. That will start to become the dominant experience of loving kindness and compassion. And it's not that it goes away completely, but so now I have an awareness. Oh, you just got triggered. But it is so much softer and gentler. I just have this awareness to that. It's like, oh, I remember when that would used to spin me out. I remember when I wasn't even conscious of it and I was acting out, right? But it's the repetitive. You said this to me once, Susie, and I thought it was like, oh, of course. To reparent is to repair that part of ourselves. We are literally being the loving mother and or father to that part of ourselves that didn't receive that kind of compassion and love and understanding, creating a space for that little one to have all of his feelings and emotions without feeling that any of them are wrong, and holding a safe space for him to experience them and voice them. Such
Exactly.
powerful work. It has changed, like you said, I'm telling you, it has changed my life for real, for real. There is a new freedom that I am experiencing in all of my relationships. First and foremost, one with myself, and then every other relationship that I have. It has changed how I relate to them. By the way, in doing this work, and we sit and we address that part of ourselves, and when he feels seen and heard, that little guy, what happens is I may or may not need to go and talk to my partner or go and talk to that person. And if I do, I'm coming from a holistic, centered place. It's not reactionary. I'm able to respond from a more centered, grounded, and loving place.
And to me, that lights me up, right?
Right?
Because what it says is that each one of us has the power, the capacity, the ability to heal our own reactivity inside of ourselves. So I take dominion over my own healing. And then I am at choice. Do I want to go back and talk to my partner, my child, whomever it is, a
Right.
girlfriend, a
Right.
boss? And if so, I'm doing it from a place of equanimity and response rather than reaction. It's
Exactly.
so empowering. That for me is the heart of this work because it is so empowering to recognize now I'm at choice. And as you said, most often, more often than not, I don't have a need to go back to the other person. And though what happens is when I do go back and I'm sharing from, let's say to your example, if I were
Mhm.
to go back and share, I might have said something like, wow, this is such a trip. The other night when we were together, there I am, just like singing with this little girl. And just when you said, be quiet, oh my gosh, I was a 6-year-old. I felt this stuff with my dad. And I really actually, at the end of the day, appreciate that you said that because it allowed me to go heal that part that wanted to say, you're not the boss of me. And I'm just making it up. But you
Oh
end up
no.
sharing from
Yeah.
such an intimate, vulnerable place. It has nothing to do with the other person. You're
Right.
just letting them in to your inner world and they have nothing to feel defensive about. They have nothing to protect themselves about because you're not talking about them. You're talking about your experience.
Exactly.
And it's
And
such a
paradoxically, what is that? Connection.
yeah,
The
and it
very
creates
thing
deeper
I'm
intimacy.
looking for. It's intimacy, like in the truest sense. To the example I was sharing, by the time he and I sat on the couch, he didn't need to go to the door. He didn't need to go and do anything. But interestingly enough, 30 minutes later, we're walking to grab a bite to eat. And my partner turned to me and said, "So what happened for you? What was going on?" Exactly. And then I was able to share exactly what you said, taking full responsibility, the ability to respond to myself, and sharing what my process was around that. And by doing that, once again, now I felt seen and heard and respected and appreciated. I'd
Mm,
already given that to myself. And so when he was saying it, it was like, oh, this is so lovely. It
yeah.
wasn't necessary, but it was really lovely and
Yeah,
appreciated.
and I think what's so beautiful, and we'll end on that's such a beautiful note to end on. I think what is so soul satisfying about what you're sharing is when we merge the survival self back with the soul self,
Mm,
it does feel very fulfilling. It feels very soul satisfying not to live at sort of the topsoil level of our life where it's like, who's
mm.
really to blame and who said what and he said this and I said that, but really to handle that inside of your own self because the soul of us wants to rise up and it
That's right.
wants to live a life that is shining and sharing our light. And it doesn't mean that we don't get into conflicts and disagreements. It's not Pollyanna. But what it is it's allowing ourselves to embrace our humanity so that we can relate to each other from that deep, intimate, vulnerable, connected place. And isn't intimacy and connection what we all want?
That's the
So
ball game.
I
Yes.
love it. Yeah. I thank you. What a great example. That's such
Thank
a
you.
practical example. I hope that all of you listening are receiving this in a way that is practical and tangible. Clearly, this is what we are passionate about, and I know the power of healing that is available to you all if you lean into this. And I have courses on it if you're interested. I'll put some in the show notes if you want to dive deeper. There is a depth to this practice that I promise you, you will heal within yourself. You will transform within yourself. You will reconnect with your most authentic soul self, and you will be able to bring that both within yourself when you are reactive, and then you will be able to articulate it to others around you in a way that really also allows that intimacy. So I thank you, Joe. It's clear when I hear you that you practice because of the tone and the way that you are able to be with yourself. And I'm grateful to you. I'm so thankful. And if any of you have received something of depth, usable, practical, real for you, it would mean so much to us if you would send this to a friend, share this with a friend. There are so many of us out there right now that are seeking and searching and don't want to be reactive and are looking for a way to heal ourselves. And I've never found anything that is as loving and compassionate and healing and effective as the way that we work with the inner child. So
100%. And to that point, don't you have a course called Healing the Inner Child?
I have a course called Healing the Heart of the Inner Child.
Yeah.
And it is a really deep, reparative, reconnected course. It's online. You can do it at your own pace. And this fall, I'm going to be offering it in person. So you can get it and then jump into the course when we do it this fall live on Zoom. So you can jump in there as well. So thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Love you, Suze.
Yeah, love you too. Love to everyone. And here is to your own healing. Much love, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If there was something in this conversation that spoke to you, we'd so appreciate it if you would take the time to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with women and mothers you know, because you are here to thrive. See you next time.